our creativity doesn't stop when our job ends. You're still a creative person, and there's still a lot of skills you can apply to marketing yourself.
Welcome to Real Creative Leadership, a video podcast produced by the Stoke Group and hosted by me, Adam Morgan. Layoffs and market volatility are on everyone's minds these days, and creatives aren't immune to the impact. We're all thinking about where are we going to go? What are we going to do? Is my company okay? But we're also uniquely positioned to not only prepare for the uncertainty of an unstable marketplace, but to thrive. Today, I'm joined by Shachar Aylon, a multi-talented creative who has spent more than a decade evolving brands through his expertise in photography, writing, filmmaking, and design. Shachar is currently creative director for AMP at Amazon Music. Throughout his career, he has often focused on the mission behind the brand, through social impact campaigns for Lyft and Intel, to rebranding PixArt to center inclusion. Shachar, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here on Real Creative Leadership. And before we get into today's heavy topic of how we, thrive in a down economy, I know our listeners are eager to hear about you a little bit more. So if you want to give us a little bit of insight about your career and your background, and then we can jump into the topic.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name is Shachar. It means sunrise or dawn in Hebrew. I'm a creative director, a multidisciplinary one with a background in writing, design, and photography. And like you mentioned, I'm currently a creative director at a music startup called AMP at Amazon Music. Throughout my career, I've spent half of my career at agencies like 72 and Sunny, Saatchi and Saatchi, collected some shiny awards along the way. And then half of my experience has been spent in-house. I made that transition when it was in the early days. Lots of my efforts and energy were spent on building teams, figuring out the processes. Who do we actually need in in-house teams? And branding, positioning the companies, figuring out how do we inject that human touch to tech companies. That is a gap I saw throughout my career, throughout my work, where tech companies struggled to look, sound, or act human. So that's really something I focus on in my work and with my teams.
Well, clearly you've done a lot, and you've had a good career with a lot of paths, a lot of opportunities, a lot of different roles, which I think is really interesting for today's conversation, because we're going to be talking about how do you find those opportunities, and clearly you've made the jumps to find those opportunities. So what do you look for as you've made this interesting career path for yourself? What are you looking for in those opportunities?
Yeah, this is a topic that is very interesting to me, both on an individual level as a creative leader, but also when you look at our industry as a whole. And I'd like to touch upon both of them. I'd love your take on it too, Adam.
Yeah.
On an individual level, when I looked at kind of early stages in my career, I focused a lot on, I'll call it the shiny stuff, right? Like, can I get awards? What accounts the agency is working on? How would it look on my resume? And very quickly in my career, I realized that what I should be focusing on instead is the people, the teams. So much of my experience in the workplace is informed by my boss, by my manager, by the team I work around. I've even noticed it with students I teach or colleagues who actually went after the agency that kind of produced that shiny new project. By the time they arrived at the agency, that creative director that came up with the idea already left to another agency. So that's kind of indicative of a larger industry trend that we can talk about too. But going back to the individual level, again, it's kind of focusing on the people who can help me grow. It's recognizing that I can always learn something new and always acquire new skills. So focusing on those people who can unlock that in me and my team. But if we zoom out, we're seeing this larger industry trend where CMOs, especially in the past few years, their median tenure has been 24 to 28 months, kind of 2-3 years. So imagine the C-suite level executive, the person who is supposed to set the vision for the next 5-7 years of marketing, kind of really think about how you're positioning the company, is leaving after 2-3 years. And that really sets the tone. Like if I'm joining as a creative leader and I'm set to build a team or kind of come up with a new way for the company to show up in the world, that company has changed drastically within the 2 years I've spent my time there. So why? I guess my question to you is, why do you think that CMOs feel the need, or execs, or even creative leaders like myself feel the need that their efforts are better spent somewhere else? Like, what happens there?
It's a true statement. I looking back on the last 5 years when I was at Adobe, 100% that happened. Almost every year we had a new VP of marketing, and each of them had a completely different vision. One was focused on personas, one was focused more on industry, another one was focused more on demand, and it truly changed the whole makeup of our go-to-market plan and everything that we created. So it makes a huge, huge impact. So I won't disagree with that. Huge impact. But then why don't they stick around? Like that's a hard choice. It's the same with us. Like early in my career, I jumped around from agency to agency every couple of years just because that was your opportunity to get growth and try new things, right? But it is a problem at the top for sure. And I would say CMOs do that, but I don't know if I've seen CEOs or other roles change out as often. And maybe there's some good longevity there and some good foundation.
That's
But
exactly right, Adam.
yeah.
According to the Wall Street Journal, CEOs have a double the tenure than the CMO. So if we're looking for CMOs at like 24 to 28 months, we're looking at CEOs and other C-suite execs that are staying 50 months, 60 months on the job.
And I guess that's good. That's good for keeping that 5-year plan intact. And I don't know, I don't have the research here with me, but whether it's CMOs are rising up and finding new opportunities because they're growing so fast. I think that happened with several of the key use cases at my company. They just found newer and better opportunities. But it also could just be that it's a rough job. Like more and more responsibility is being put on the CMO, more and more KPIs that they have to deliver, and so it's a rough world to keep that going
Yeah.
year after year.
I think kind of going back to maybe the act of courage, it's almost like a magic trick when you see a brand stay consistent over decades. Like when I think about like insurance companies like Geico or Progressive, even like the magic trick is staying set on a vision and executing it. And I think it speaks volumes when you see that it's so easy to kind of chase after the next shiny thing. There are new channels, there are new mediums, there are new ways to measure our work.
Mm.
And that can increase our uncertainty or make us chase new things. And we don't have those leaders who kind of stand up and say, like, hey, what we set as a vision last year, we're going to stick to it. Like, we believe in that enough to not chase after those shiny things.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I think I had the problem where it was like my brand was changing every year, which was too often. Granted, it is pretty amazing if something lasts 10 years, but I also feel like brands evolve and stories evolve. I mean, if you look even just the marketplace in the last 5 years for us has been wildly, different in each of the years of like from the pandemic to the post-pandemic to where we are now. We got to be careful. There's got to be some flex, but also, some consistency in everything you do. But I want to go back a little bit when you were talking about beyond just like the leadership changing out, but also in your career of what you were looking for. And I also did a similar thing where, you're jumping around, you're looking for opportunities. Certainly early in your career, you're making those big leaps. But I was also, I don't think I had the perspective back then that I do now of, and that's funny. I have a daughter in college who's going through the same question of like, why am I, always being pushed to the bottom of the list or, not being considered for this or that. And I think it's just having a little bit more of a long-term perspective. There's some books I've talked about on the show in the past of like, how do you really craft a career and look ahead and think of like, where do I want to end up? Not necessarily what shiny object I'm chasing right now or what role happens to be open right now, but really to think deeply about what you want out of your career and what are the gaps that you personally have and where you need to learn and what you need to grow in order to get to that final destination.
And that's been a great unlock in my career. And I can almost connect the dots when I look at the managers who inspired me or kind of unlocked a new skill in my path. I can almost see the residue of it now as I'm kind of like leading teams, as I'm thinking about how should I respond to this situation, or how should I kind of guide them through this challenging project. I find myself going back to examples from those managers I adored or admired. And I think it also speaks to the value of having your network, kind of having those people who you can consult with. I think maybe you can relate too, where the higher up you go, it, it might feel more lonely. Like there are not people.
100%.
Yeah, like how many ECDs are in one organization? Not so many. So you kind of need to start branching off to other companies, other people in your network, and see what they're experiencing. So I found that as someone who wants to continue and grow, sometimes you're capped internally, and you kind of need to start reaching out.
Mm. Well, let's talk about that now. Today's episode is all about how do you thrive in a down economy. So people are concerned with layoffs. People are concerned with budget cuts and all these other problems that are happening in the macroeconomic environment. So we talked earlier how you're, excited. There's still opportunities. So talk to me about what makes you bullish in this, in this environment that we have today.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's worth acknowledging this is a hard time. If anybody's listening to it who has experienced some sort of layoff, restructure, some sort of volatility, know that you're not alone. A lot of people I talk to, whether it's colleagues, friends, coworkers, they've experienced a similar thing. We're in a time where there are budget cuts, uncertainty, remote work. Remote work has been introduced to us like just 3 years ago. That's still a challenge for some teams. First of all, no, you're not alone. This is something everybody's experiencing across the board. And we know that creativity thrives when the environment encourages outside of the box thinking, risk taking, trying new things. So it's almost like these two things stand in opposition from one another, where there's a lot of uncertainty, and yet to be creative, to be bold, you need to try something new or take that risk. So that also, to me, presents the opportunity, the upside, where you can make something phenomenal, the reward for a big risk. We know as creatives also that when everybody zigs, you zag. We know that if everybody's playing it safe, this is now your golden opportunity to cut through the noise and do something completely different. This is the moment where brands are built, companies are being transformed, and new winners emerge. We're seeing it all the time. So going back to my earlier point, I remember consulting with one of my mentors, a previous manager I had at Lyft. His name is Tim Rohn. He's now at McGarrett Jesse, Austin. And he said, if you do a good campaign, you might win some awards. It might look good on your resume. But if you transform a business, if you manage to really make an impact for the company, you become a legend. And I truly believe that if you use this opportunity to think in a transformative way, you're on a different level.
That's so interesting. And maybe even digging back in that a little bit of, it's like when you were talking about how there's, careers are made or there's opportunity in this down economy. I think back on like, what are the true skills of a creative person? I mean, for those of us who have had a lot of experience in coming up with ideas or pushing for new concepts or whatever, it's true that it's like you explore a lot of ideas. You don't just go for the first idea, the low-hanging fruit. You have to keep pushing and pushing to find ideas, versus where I think a lot of people in business are used to just like, sometimes they'll just get one idea and just get stuck on that and keep beating on it, right? So I think one of our superpowers here in this opportunity economy is to look at the landscape and look for a lot of different ideas, look for a lot of different places to go and move and ways to flex, right? So rather than just thinking, in my career, the only option is to go to A in this one company and that's it, where I think we could look at it in a lot of different opportunities. Maybe it's not, just going from freelance to in-house to agency to this to that. Like there's just so many different ways to look at your career and where you're going to learn. And so maybe that is also a big plus side to being a creative is being able to generate new options and look at all those options rather than just being, kind of frozen in this path of like, oh, I only have one chance at this thing and that's it. So I think that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
But you also said something earlier that was interesting. You said courageous. So let's talk about that for a minute. So how can we be more courageous creatively? How can we, not just in our work, but in our careers, to be more courageous?
Mm-hmm. I want to start with an example, a project I recently worked on a few years ago, and then we can examine some of the key ingredients I believe are essential to make courageous work or creative ideas that feel courageous. So this was back in 2019. I was working at Lyft, and if you remember, there was a huge debate in culture and the news among policymakers around immigration. That was a hot topic. It still is a hot topic, but it felt like it's everywhere you turn. That is the main conversation. And Lyft built their brand, built their company, doing the right thing. Time and time again, they showed up to communities and really did things that felt impactful and went beyond just kind of like revenue or money. So we created a small task force to examine that idea of immigration and what is our stance as a company around that, and whether we should even like make a stand around immigration. So this small team, myself included, we did some research and we found that almost 60%, over 50% of our drivers, Lyft drivers, are immigrants or from immigrant families. So any policy that is being passed on a legislative level or discussions in the community are directly impacting the people who are literally driving the business. And so that was our opportunity to make a case why Lyft should invest in it. And we came up with this beautiful idea. It's called America's an Idea. It was launched on the 4th of July and basically redefined what American means in 2019. A lot has changed, and our definition of like the kind of Americana, the white picket fence, like has also changed. Immigration and immigrants have such a big role now in American culture. So we released it. We told all these beautiful, amazing stories about our drivers who are also immigrants and how they're contributing to different communities. And we racked up a record level of donations. The project was a success, but it was a scary project to work on, right? Like you're kind of trying to convince all these C-suite executives like to forget about the logo for a second, to forget about kind of like the bottom line and think about kind of like a larger issue and kind of insert yourself in this very heated debate. And I think there were a few key ingredients that allowed us not only to make a case for it and kind of launch this successful project, but also to facilitate that courageous thinking within the team. So one of the things I mentioned, and I truly believe in it, is small teams. I'm sure you've experienced it where there's just too many cooks in the kitchen and everybody's talented, everybody's smart. It's not like there shouldn't be that extra person in the meeting. It's hard to like say no, like we're going to keep it small. But what I found is like the syndrome I call like too many smart people in one room, where like the group think, the collective ends up kind of shaving off the odd edges, the rough parts of idea that make it actually unique and special and different, or maybe even courageous. It's easier to point out what could go wrong than like imagine what if it actually works? What if actually we can swing it? So I think one key ingredient for courageous ideas is small teams. Within that team, we also had an incredible sense of ownership. There wasn't a duplicity of role. Like there was one writer, there was one designer, one creative director, one account manager, one producer. So it didn't feel like anybody's stepping on each other's toes. Like we felt like one team. And then very transparent, like throughout the process, we tried to highlight to the executives, what is the risk of doing this, instead of like sugarcoating it, like it's going to go great. and also transparent with other teams. Like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're not going to keep it behind kind of closed doors. We want you to be involved in the process, and we want you to feel a sense of ownership of it as well. So I think those three key ingredients really encourage people to be more courageous.
It's interesting about courageous, like when that was a great story, by the way, of talking about how you made a plan and you went out after that, on that very hot topic. But, from the outside, it's hard to see when someone makes a courageous move. It's like, whoa, they're just so bold and they're just so crazy. And looking back, like I've heard this a lot of like entrepreneurs where, successful entrepreneurs aren't just super risky. It's just very calculated risk. And so when hearing that story, I hear, okay, you went and did some research first. You really felt like, it was whatever, over 50%, 60%, whatever it was like, you have to, like, if you don't make a stand, it's going to cause even bigger problems. And people probably had no idea about that stat. And so they're just seeing you as very courageous. But I think that's one other element is like, not just, have small teams and be authentic, but like have calculated risk, right? Like, it's going to be risky, and just be ready for that and do your homework as best you can. And so maybe let's apply that to creatives in their own work. Like, so when do they know? When is the right time to do it? Do you go out and do some research, or do you just go out and test the water? I don't know. Like, I'd love to hear from you of like, if you're giving advice to someone, whether it's like doing a bold project or doing some bold move with their career, what's the right time?
Yeah. Um, it's exactly what you mentioned, Adam. Those ideas that might feel risky at times actually don't feel risky at all when you have a rock solid brief. And I'd say that's the time when you can take the leap, when you have a justification to the why. Why are we doing this thing, this project, this campaign, this rebrand, whatever that is? If we know why we're choosing this path over another, a lot of times those risky ideas, quote unquote, don't feel risky at all, because again, we can go back and look at it. One example that comes to mind is Old Spice. This is a story I heard. Like, obviously, everybody on who's listening to this knows Old Spice, and they've probably seen the commercials. But I found the story of how they got to where they got fascinating. I was part of a online course with Jason Bagley. He's ECD from Wyden Kennedy, and he was basically in charge with his team to create Old Spice, or like reinvigorate Old Spice. Back then, nobody even considered Old Spice, and he had this task of walking into Procter and Gamble, megacorp, like so many people, the opposite of a small team, and present to them how to make Old Spice relevant to young teenager boys, basically. And what they did, even before presenting ideas and before even kind of talking about creative, they showed a 5-minute film of what goes inside the brain of a teenage boy. The TV shows, the memes, the cultures, social media. It was like this mashup of video bonanza kind of things that just pass through a teenager's mind. And you can imagine, after seeing that video, following that up with that wacky work we've seen from Old Spice actually kind of makes sense. Suddenly it kind of fits within that mindset. You understand why heads are exploding, why muscles are like kind of flying off of the body and stuff like that. It all makes sense. So that's how an elite team from Wyden sold Old Spice and kind of convinced them to actually take that risk. So that's kind of on the company level, on how you can do it from a creative standpoint. But I think also as a leader, there's a role for you, for a leader, to encourage that courageous thinking, or to encourage your teams to take a creative risk. And I think, and it might sound counterintuitive, but I think your job is to encourage your team to fail. Now, again, let me explain. It might sound a little counterintuitive, but if we know that great creative work requires trying something new or taking a risk, if your team members feel like you're going to point a finger at them or going to blame them for trying something new, because we know not everything that we try for the first time will succeed. We know that there's some risk involved. We know that not everything is going to work. So if we're going to point fingers at them, blame them, or hold them accountable to um, everything they do, then they're going to play it safe. They're not going to want to take that leap. They're not going to want to take that risk. So it's up to us to find that right altitude, that right level of almost acceptance of failure. Like, it's okay to try something. That's going to be hard to hear for, like, if I said to the CMO, like, hey, like, I want my teams to fail, they might be like, whoa, like, you've taken it too far, Shachar.
Yeah.
But I think within our teams, there's a lot of room for experimentation, trying new things, and actually celebrating those mistakes sometimes.
Well, if what I'm hearing is right, so in the story from Jason Bagley of the Old Spice, what they did in order to do something courageous and sell a big creative idea is to set the stage. They really just set the environment and the audience and kind of set the stage. And what you're saying as a creative leader is if you want, in a different scenario where you're not pitching an idea, but you're trying to set up a department or a team or even yourself, you have to set the stage, which is make it sure there's an environment that they feel comfortable trying new things and not feeling like they're going to get crushed for trying something like that. So what are other things that you would do as a creative leader to set the stage and build that prime environment?
Mm-hmm. So beyond making sure that they have kind of permission to take risks, that they can thrive, I would say that teams need to know, similar to the strategy, like, you almost need to be the North Star or kind of the lighthouse for teams. Especially in a field like creative, there's a lot of subjectivity involved. What might be a great design for one person might be a totally terrible design for another person, and it's the same thing they're looking at. I think as leaders, we need to focus a lot on kind of showing what good work looks like for us, showing examples from the world, highlighting things that work well. If I think about feedback, for example, like, this is a daily thing we do with our teams every day. We give feedback on the work, we give notes, changes. More often than not, we focus on what needs to be fixed or what needs to kind of change.
Yep.
I would like to see more often people focus on actually what is worth retaining. I've seen incredible results when you actually highlight what works very well in a project, even if it's an email banner, because people remember it. People want to hear that positive feedback that kind of reinforces their feeling that they feel they're creative, they're answering the brief, they're doing a good job, and they'll remember it for the next project. So you basically gave them a tool to implement not only on this project, but for other projects that come along the way. So I think that can be very powerful.
It is. It is. I totally agree. Like, that's on giving feedback. People might say, oh, whatever, everyone gets a trophy. We've, this whole mindset of the new generation that everyone wins. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying when you're giving feedback, it's important to give the positive as well as the negative, because you're learning from that and you know what's working and what's not working, rather than just always what's not working. Otherwise, you're just guessing at what is working. So I love that. That's great.
Exactly.
Well, maybe let me ask this one. Is we've talked a little bit about, as established creative leaders, setting the environment, setting the example, inspiring them, helping them take risks in the right way. What would you say to someone who's just new to creative leadership, who, how should they do things differently than what we did in the past? Is there, where maybe we've screwed up or we've done something differently, is there an opportunity for them to try something new, with a clean slate?
If you're a creative leader that is maybe stepping into your first job as a creative leader, maybe you're taking on a new role, maybe a new team, one of the most important things is who is managing you. And we've talked about it. I don't think we need to expand on it. But the other thing I've noticed is, or a lot of my success has come from focusing on the people and not the work. And again, it might sound counterintuitive because we should be focusing on both things. But I've seen tremendous success when I've helped my team unlock their potential and do their job well, I've seen better results than me trying to scrutinize a specific
Mm-hmm.
design or a specific comma in a sentence. Like those are things that last for the short term. Like, sure, maybe I was able to interject and fix that little project, but if I'm focusing on the people, I'm really giving them the tools to succeed in their role. And I think that is where I've seen some of the best leaders lead. Um, and that would be my advice to other people who are stepping into that role.
Oh, I love that because I think a lot of times people feel like no matter what level you're at, whether you're, leader or practitioner or someone in the middle, someone at the top, you feel like you want to prove your value. And so it's like getting in there and showing that you know what's going on and you could talk about it. But there really is truth in that, feeling that confidence as a creative leader that your role isn't necessarily to get in and be the one spouting off on why this design is best or why this, story is written well, but to really just craft the people and make sure they're growing and able to answer those questions. So it doesn't detract from your job. It doesn't detract from your role as a leader, but it's just behind the scenes, which is awesome.
And I'd say it's even a courageous decision. Like I can
Mm-hmm.
imagine how in a lot of organizations, especially large ones, there's an element of showing up with a perfect result. Like if you're sitting in front of a boardroom, you want to make sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people to kind of micromanage that. Like kind of, I want to show up to that meeting and everything should be perfect. The braver decision, the brave decision to make here is actually, you know what? I'm going to focus less on the theatrics or the showmanship of this moment and focus more on a learning opportunity for my team. Maybe they get to present. Maybe they get to feel the burn when something doesn't go right. Right? Like by experiencing it and giving them the opportunity to be in those discussions will actually make them better by just recognizing it and seeing it and being part of that process. So sometimes I remember even like consciously thinking like, you know what? I would have changed how you position this idea walking into this room, but I need you to experience it for yourself. I need you to kind of advocate for what you believe in and see how that unfolds before I kind of come in and fix everything.
Well, this has been great. A lot of good advice. Maybe as we're closing here, just, do you have any other final advice for people who are in this down economy, looking for opportunities, looking to be courageous, looking to do something new and different? What last advice do you have for them?
Of course. Our creativity doesn't stop when our job ends. Whether people are just looking to make a move or maybe you are actively looking for a job, you're still a creative person and there's still a lot of skills you can apply that you know from your day-to-day job that you can apply to marketing yourself. There's so many platforms now, so many channels where you can promote your not only yourself but your thought leadership, your your hobbies, your hustles, whatever that is. Someone out there in the world wide web wants to see it, wants to consume that, and the more you can bring that to the forefront, I think the more people will gravitate towards that. If you build it, people will come. If you're passionate about video and you post videos all the time, people will come to you and ask for videos. This is basically my LinkedIn feed, right? Like a bunch of
Mm.
people talking about what they're great at. And it's fun and inspiring to see all these people contributing.
And I'd add to that, not only the more you just put yourself out there and share your voice and your talents and your things, it's not just that the people will come asking for those projects, your career will grow from it. Like your opportunities will increase, your new jobs will open up. I'm sure, a lot of the crazy things that I've done and put out there has helped to get me new opportunities and new jobs throughout my career for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of almost, I 100% agree. It's almost like the unspoken truth of these social platforms where we're putting ourselves on display and we're also scrolling through these feeds. We're going through the content because we recognize that there is a lot of value in what people want to say, what they want to share. And I find myself almost every day discovering a new little tidbit of information or a new project that is super interesting. So don't stop being creative just because your job ended. I mean, like whether it's the time has ended, like it's 5 p.m. and I closed my laptop, or you're looking for a new one.
Mm. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's funny that we're talking about social media because now I want you to share a little bit of how people can follow you or learn more about you, or where do you put yourself out there?
Yeah, so I tend to be active on LinkedIn. People can follow me or request invites on LinkedIn. My name is Shachar Aylon. I have Instagram called Chuck is in Luck. That was my nickname coming to Israel.
Mm.
And I also run what I call is Directors Club. It goes back to what I mentioned, where at the director level and above, people can feel sometimes like it's lonely. They need
Mm.
to branch out and talk to other people at the same position in different companies to hear their experiences. So it's a small forum. It's very casual, but if anybody who's listening to it is curious about Directors Club, wants to talk to other creative directors, share advice, insights, email me, shachar.elon@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can make it work.
Well, thank you so much for being here on Real Creative Leadership. I appreciate all your insights. As always, you can find me at adamwmorgan.com. And finally, this show is produced by the Stoke Group, a full-service digital agency that specializes in content marketing, video, and interactive experiences. So if you're looking for a partner for strategy or content or anything else, visit thestokegroup.com. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.